2:41 a.m., Persian Gulf, roughly 75 nautical miles northwest of the Strait of Hormuz, a cluster of fast-moving surface contacts suddenly appeared on the outer edge of the USS John C. Stennis carrier strike group's surveillance picture. 16 small Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy attack boats, packed tightly in formation, were racing across black water with no running lights, no radio traffic, and no attempt to identify themselves. They were moving at more than 50 knots. On land, that kind of speed is reckless. On open water, in darkness, it is something else entirely. At that velocity, the outer escorts had only a few minutes to solve a problem no commander ever wants to face in confined waters. A massed swarm of expendable small craft charging directly toward a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. And that is the nightmare scenario. Because in naval warfare, there is a point where technology, training, and firepower all run into the same hard limit: time. This is the kind of threat planners describe as a mass raid, not because each attacking platform is individually powerful, but because the group is designed to overload the defender's ability to respond. Every defensive system has a cycle. Every gun has a tracking limit. Every missile system has a magazine depth. Every crew has only so many seconds to classify, assign, engage, and kill a target before the next one enters the picture. If enough attackers arrive together, the defense can still perform perfectly and still be saturated. And against a carrier, saturation is the real weapon. The Iranian fast attack concept had been built around exactly that logic. Small fiberglass boats, minimal cost, high speed, low signature in cluttered Gulf conditions. Crews small enough to be expendable, payloads large enough to matter. Some carried unguided rockets, some heavy machine guns, and all of them relied on one advantage above everything else: closing distance faster than the defender can process the fight. For years, analysts had studied the theory. That night, the theory came straight at a carrier strike group. The warning picture before the incident had looked active, but not extraordinary. Satellite coverage in the previous 48 hours had shown increased traffic at an IRGCN coastal staging area. More small craft than usual, more movement around the harbor. But the activity matched patterns seen during earlier exercises, dispersal drills, maneuver rehearsals, readiness postures that were aggressive but not immediately actionable. If you think those 8 minutes were the only thing standing between control and catastrophe, hit like, subscribe, and comment below, because the next question is even more disturbing. What happens when that warning never comes? Historically, the assessment made sense. Operationally, it was wrong. The boats had left the Iranian coast in ordered columns, initially heading away from the carrier group. On radar, the movement resembled a routine patrol track. Then, just before 2:30, the formation pivoted together one coordinated turn. No hesitation, no confusion, no drift, and accelerated on a direct line toward the American carrier. A P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, already airborne and watching from distance, caught the turn first. Its crew reported multiple small contacts, increasing speed and changing course in a pattern consistent with a deliberate attack run. That report mattered more than anyone knew in the moment, because the strike group did not just need information, it needed warning time. By the time the contacts were confirmed on the group's own sensors, the picture was unmistakable. 16 boats, high speed, organized spacing, no lights, no communications, no deviation, heading straight for the center of the formation. No fishing traffic behaves like that, no commercial traffic behaves like that, and no harmless vessel charges a carrier strike group in darkness at 50+ knots. The surface warfare team elevated the contacts to imminent hostile. At that point, the strike group commander was forced into a decision cycle that had to compress doctrine, law, risk, and geometry into seconds. There were only a few real options: launch fighters immediately and kill the formation as far from the carrier as possible. Push the escort destroyers forward and let them meet the swarm with guns, close-in weapons, and layered shipboard defense. Do both at once and accept the complexity of running air and surface fires simultaneously in a rapidly tightening battle space. or maneuver the carrier itself, not because a carrier can outrun fast attack craft, but because a turn can reshape the engagement, change approach angles, and buy a little more room for the defense. What nobody wanted was the final layer, the carrier's own close-in defensive systems. Because if the carrier is using those systems against boats, then the boats are already much too close. The order that went out reflected exactly how serious the situation had become. Alert fighters were launched without delay. Destroyers were directed to move aggressively toward the threat axis. The carrier altered course to widen the engagement geometry, and surface units were authorized to fire on any boat crossing the inner engagement threshold without waiting for further clearance. That last part is important. In peacetime transit, escalation of force procedures matter. Warnings matter, hails matter, visual signals matter. But once 16 unidentified boats are closing at attack speed in the middle of the night, the legal and tactical debate is already over. The question is no longer whether the threat is real. The question is whether the defense still has enough time left to stop it. The first fighters got airborne fast, but not magically fast. Even a carrier's ready alert needs minutes to convert from posture to action. By the time the lead aircraft arrived over the formation, the boats had already eaten up a huge section of water. The opening strike was designed to do more than destroy targets. It was meant to break momentum. One of the lead attack boats disappeared in a flash as an air-to-surface missile found its engines. Another was crippled by cannon fire. The formation did what disciplined formations are supposed to do under pressure. It kept moving, but it slowed, and slowing changed everything. Not enough to make the threat disappear, just enough to let the defense breathe. More aircraft joined the fight. Repeated attack passes began carving the formation apart, forcing the boats to separate, weave, and lose the neat geometry that had made the swarm dangerous in the first place. Some boats tried to stay in line. Others broke outward, looking for angles around the escorts. That widened the threat picture but also exposed the attackers to shipboard guns. One destroyer engaged boats trying to slip around the flank. Another fired on a splinter group, attempting to create a second approach axis. This is where swarm tactics become both dangerous and fragile. Their strength is volume, their weakness is coordination. Once air attack, maneuver, and defensive fire start breaking the formation into fragments, the attackers stop behaving like a single weapon and start behaving like isolated targets. Still, isolated does not mean harmless. A few boats getting through would have been enough to force a brutal close-range defense around the carrier itself. Even a lightly armed craft can become strategically significant if it reaches the hull of a capital ship. That was the real objective behind an operation like this. Not necessarily to sink the carrier, not even necessarily to win tactically, just to get close enough to prove vulnerability, close enough to create images, close enough to create a story. Because in modern conflict, the damage that matters most is not always measured in tons of steel. Sometimes it is measured in headlines. By the final stage of the engagement, the original 16-boat rush had been shattered. Most of the formation had been destroyed, disabled, or forced out of the fight before any of the attackers could enter effective weapons range against the carrier. One or two damaged boats were left drifting. At least one broke away entirely and ran back toward the Iranian coast. The carrier remained untouched. No American warship took a hit. No U.S. personnel were killed. The strike group had survived the encounter exactly the way layered naval defense is designed to work. Early warning, rapid classification, overlapping response, and relentless pressure before the threat can compress the range. But the after-action lesson was not comforting. It was sobering, because the result depended on warning time that almost certainly would not exist in every future scenario. The maritime patrol aircraft's early detection created the gap between a controlled defense and a desperate close-in emergency. Remove those minutes, and the engagement changes completely. That is the part professionals focus on, not the fact that the swarm was defeated, but how narrow the margin really was. If the boats had been detected later, if the turn had happened closer, if the patrol aircraft had not been there, if the formation had emerged already inside the outer decision window, then the fight, would have looked very different. And that is why encounters like this matter. Not because they prove a carrier is weak, and not because they prove a swarm is unstoppable. They matter because they expose the thin line between confidence and compression in naval warfare. They show how quickly a technologically superior force can be dragged into a fight where seconds become more valuable than missiles, where cheap platforms challenge billion-dollar systems, and where the side that controls time controls the battle. The carrier stayed on station, the Gulf stayed dangerous, and the lesson remained the same. A navy does not fail only when it lacks firepower. Sometimes it fails when the threat arrives faster than doctrine was built to handle. Stay sharp, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next one.